Hi, I'm Chris Lucian. Co-host is Austin Chadwick. Welcome to the Mob Mentality Show. And our guest today is Sam Taggart. And we're going to be going through introducing Agile concepts into the LabVIEW world and challenges with that, selling ideas and convincing people to try new things, and the importance of knowing what good looks like, and go from there. But Sam, just to get us started, can you give us a little introduction about yourself, and then we can jump into the topics?
Yeah, my name's Sam Taggart. I became a programmer actually kind of by accident. I got a degree in electrical engineering and I started working at this company. And they made nuclear power plants, but they had this circuit board tester that was programmed in this language called LabVIEW. And so that kind of started my programming journey. So,
Awesome. Well, yeah, we can jump right into it. Speaking of LabVIEW, in that world, introducing agile concepts, what did that look like?
yeah. So the LabVIEW world is pretty far behind the normal software engineering world. LabVIEW is a language, it's graphical, it's designed for people who aren't necessarily programmers. So you're drawing basically flowcharts, and in the background, it kind of gets compiled into something that runs. It is a full-fledged programming language. And so the big challenge in that world is a lot of the people are scientists and engineers, and they're doing experiments. And I don't know if you've inherited any code from like PhDs or anything, but
Yeah.
they're really smart people, not necessarily the world's greatest coders. And so you get a lot of that, and they're not really exposed to best practices and things like test-driven development and all the XP practices. They don't really get exposed to that. So that's a challenge. And the language itself is kind of challenging because it's this graphical programming language. All the files are binary files, which makes it really hard to do source code control and diffing and things that you kind of take for granted when you're writing text files.
Hmm.
So those are challenges. The other challenge is dealing with hardware. So a lot of the stuff interacts directly with pumps and motors and valves. And so, you can somehow sometimes verify that you're sending the correct command, but you can't verify that the machine is doing the correct thing without actually having all the hardware there to check.
Yeah.
Those are some of the challenges that come up.
Yeah. So I think, we might have similar challenges in the sense that a lot of the software that we write interacts with a lot of hardware um, over hex APIs and things like that. And so it's a pretty interesting topic. And so I can imagine that uh, in that environment, especially in the graphical language environment, and difficulties with source control, pivoting or like you said, verifying if something works can be really challenging. So I think that in those environments, people end up favoring waterfall because they want to test everything at the very end. And because it's so hard to do that you only want to invest in the testing once and things like that. So how do you handle things like this where agility often implies frequency, where frequency is low?
Yeah, there's a lot of conservatism that goes on because sometimes these things are controlling giant pumps and valves and motors and big power supplies and things like that. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. And also, like you said, the verification is hard because often the verification means setting up the entire system and running it. And sometimes that's not always possible. And like, I worked in the company that made nuclear power plants and stuff. You can't just like scram the reactor and see what happens. That doesn't really work all the time. So there's a lot of challenges with that. I think setting up testing environments is big. I think the idea of having the software in a releasable state all the time, even if you don't necessarily make all those releases, is I found useful. So, for example, you're in version one, you make a bunch of intermediate releases, you release version two, and you send that to your customer, and it doesn't work. If you have all those intermediate versions and they're all runnable, you can always do like a binary search and have them run one of the intermediate versions, and that helps. So, those are the type of things that I try to get people to do. It's an uphill battle, but that's what I try to do and encourage people to do. So
Yeah, and I think I'm wondering, yeah, it almost reminds me of the world where like people will build departments or companies or processes off of like Excel. It's wonderfully fast to get started, uh, but then the maintainability becomes an issue because, you know, Bob is the maintainer of the spreadsheet and he's got his, 500 formulas in there and they're very fragile and you just got to touch them just right. Does that same kind of thing happen with LabVIEW? And I guess I'm trying to, because if it just works, what would be the need for agile practices? But I could see if it's fragile, agile practices could help quite a bit
Yeah,
with that. Is it a similar story with LabVIEW, or what are your thoughts there?
things definitely do get really fragile. I think it falls apart when people try to scale things. So,
Mm,
classic example is you have a mechanical engineer working for a company. They design some product. He writes a simple test VI or function right program to test the thing, and it works great. You know how to program. We want to mass produce this thing. Let's produce 1,000 of them a day on an assembly line, and you write the tester that runs at the end of the assembly line. And that's a totally different program, right? Because in the lab, uptime doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be super accurate. If something crashes, you just reboot it and no big deal. But if it shuts down an assembly line for a couple days or a week, that's a big deal. So that's kind of the driving force behind a lot of the changes, I think, and a lot of the adopting the better practices is trying to scale and failing at scaling.
So, how have you adapted LabVIEW to handle the, so you had an interesting statement there, I think, in that last segment where you were saying that testing is really, difficult or something along those lines. Are you adapting LabVIEW to have a way to do unit testing or implement some of these practices, or is there some other aspect of the process that you've adapted or changed to make agility easier?
LabVIEW has some unit testing stuff, and so that is definitely something that we try to do. We've tried to adapt some stuff from other languages and other frameworks. So, for example, uh, I saw the approval testing framework. I don't know if you all know Llewellyn, and so I took that and ported that into LabVIEW. So now we have that. So that's some of the stuff that we've been working on. Um, the other thing is being able to simulate the hardware. So a lot of it is like trying to figure out how we can simulate the hardware so that then we can test our software. And there's also this idea, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but called hardware in the loop testing.
Mm,
So there's this thing where you put like basically an FPGA or some kind of something in the loop and you're running your software not against the actual thing, but against some programmable thing that you can control.
yeah.
And so you're monitoring real world signals and stuff. They're just not coming from a pump or a motor. They're coming from some other piece of hardware. And that seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, I actually yeah, I have some hardware right now simulating flow for a device that I'm working on. And it's currently sending signals to a system that then tells the firmware to reply to it. So I do find that very helpful in collaborating. And somebody had to go in and make this, custom piece of hardware or something that they're, a small piece, but with some custom firmware, but it ends up helping the iteration cycle and the collaboration. So in making these changes, what aspects of the process have changed and do you interact with these other groups like firmware and hardware? And is there an interpersonal aspect to these things as you work through this?
Yeah, so a lot of LabVIEW engineers are also hardware and firmware engineers. So there's a lot of crossover, and a lot of times, a lot of LabVIEW people end up working alone or in very small groups. And so you're kind of responsible for the hardware design and the software. And because a lot of it's very engineering heavy, you kind of have to understand both sides because you can't write this control software without actually understanding the physics of what's going on, or you're going to make
Right.
mistakes. Yeah. So
All right. Well, I think that might lead into our kind of next topic anyway, is selling ideas and convincing people to try new things. And maybe this goes back to the LabVIEW or maybe other parts, but what were you thinking here in this topic?
yeah, I've found the best way I found to sell ideas is talking about risk. So I used to be a very avid rock climber, and so it's all about managing risk. And so I feel like in software, like a discussion I've had recently was about refactoring and taking small steps versus taking that giant leap. And to me, that's all about risk, right? I think of it as like if I'm climbing a mountain, there's a crevasse, I can jump over the crevasse or I can go around it. Going around it takes longer, but it's more of a sure thing. Jumping over it, if it's really small, sure, maybe jump over it, everything's fine. But if you jump over and you miss and you land in the middle of the crevasse, it takes a long time to recover from that.
Hmm.
And I think the refactoring is the same way. If you do this giant refactoring in one giant step, if it works, great. But the bigger that step is, the less likely it is to work, and then the more work you have to recover from that. So
Yeah, and that highlights something I was thinking about too. Going back to LabVIEW a little bit in that, especially when you're working with software, whether it's LabVIEW or traditional code, that interacts with firmware and hardware. Software itself can be quite a large cognitive load to understand everything that's going on. And then you add to that firmware and hardware. And so if you do a thing that exercises all three at the same time, and something goes wrong, it's much harder to figure out where the problem is, in my experiences. And so that kind of chunking, like you said, can help reduce the risk. Like, oh, does the LabVIEW or the software do what we expected to do? Great. Does the firmware do what we expected to do? Great. Does the hardware do what we expected to? Great. Oh, we do it all together and it all fails. Oh, it must be the interaction between those three pieces. Like it as opposed to, uh, I think one of the most stressful experiences for me as a software engineer is something's broken. It could be one of 100 things. Go. And you're just kind of flailing about in the pile of hay looking for the needle. And so I think I think you started to hit on it. Like I guess kind of going back to LabVIEW a little bit. One more question I had on that was the so there's a way to not talk to the real hardware, but to talk to like a simulated hardware.
yep.
Is there a way to mock or abstract it away completely, such that you're like only testing LabVIEW stuff to isolate that? Is that possible or
Yeah, we definitely do some of that stuff. So like
okay?
the things often in lab you end up talking to serial instruments that communicate
Mm,
over like old school serial ports. And so
okay,
you can create like a virtual loopback and then you can read what's being sent out. And so you can verify that you're sending the correct commands. To go back to your thing of like, we're making sure we're sending the command that we think we're sending. And
right,
then at some point you have to hook it up to the hardware and verify that the hardware actually responds to that command the way you think it does and et cetera. But
okay.
at least you can help isolate the problem a bit. And I think that goes back also to the like making smaller, more frequent releases, not having to sort through 200 different change files versus sorting through like three change files is definitely a huge advantage.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. And I guess kind of pivoting back to the convincing people. So you're sitting in a unique space with kind of the LabVIEW world. Um, is there anything in particular that you've seen with getting firmware engineers, hardware engineers to try new things that's maybe specific to their world and domain? Yeah, anything come to mind?
Well, I think hardware engineers are used to slower cycles.
Mm,
So like, you design a circuit board, you send it out to get printed, it takes a few days or week or however long to come back, and then you got to populate it. And so trying to get them to think a little bit more nimbly is hard. Although I think they understand the value of testing things and designs before you send it out, though, right? Because the turnaround time and the cost is so much.
yeah.
So that helps with that part of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of like circuit board simulation and also uh frequency and interference simulators and things like that. But at some point it does all have to integrate, right? And so that integration test is often challenging, especially when it's across departments. And so selling an idea about moving faster, or especially if you have a department that doesn't want to unit test and a department that does, and then having them work together, the team that does unit test often has to find out automated ways to test the other stuff. And I've been in that scenario before where it's create the integration test with the hardware so that you can have an automated test around it. And but that also, I think, has helped encourage other groups to do that sort of testing. themselves when they finally do see it happening. So, um, uh, given the necessity of selling ideas, what are some strategies that you've used to do those things, and and how has it affected your work?
So people who do stuff with PCBs actually are really easy to sell on test-driven design, I find, because you talk to them, you're like, okay, if you're designing a circuit board and you don't think about how you're going to test it, right? At some point, you get the circuit board and you want to measure some signal. And where is that signal located? It's always on one of the inner layers of the circuit board and you can't get to it because you didn't think about how you're going to test it first. Whereas if you designed it knowing, hey, I need to test this point, you're going to bring it to the surface. And so with software, it's kind of the same way. If you think about the test, even I'm a big fan of TDD and I'm a big fan of writing the test, but even if you just stop and think about how you're going to test it first, you're going to design that software very differently because you're going to make sure that those signals are exposed and that you can call bits and pieces of it and check just that one piece as opposed to having to spin up the whole entire program to check some feature. So,
Nice. Yeah, and my knowledge in the firmware hardware world is quite limited, but something you said right there helped me remind me a lot of a reliability manufacturing engineer I used to work with. And it was quite fascinating how almost one for one, making modules or classes testable in software with making the circuit board testable and things like that, right? And having and and it's funny, like in some software testing frameworks, they call it a test harness, right? Which I believe was imported from the the firmware hardware world. Um, and literally, when he would talk about, oh, how am I going to test this? He would talk about a test harness. And so I think, like you said, in many ways, the worlds are more closely linked than you might think at first.
yeah, no, that's definitely true. And
Um,
often when so I do a lot with testing, and a large part of the testing, like the circuit board test I worked on, was how you connect the circuit board into the whole equipment, and that was a harness. And so how do you connect a tiny piece into your testing apparatus or your unit test framework? So
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think we can dive a little bit into this, the importance of knowing what good looks like. And so like, what are your thoughts there as far as that goes?
yeah, well, I feel like a lot of LabVIEW developers, partially because they're hardware people and technicians and not necessarily software engineers, they're not exposed to software engineering in general. And then often they're kind of isolated. They tend to be the only person in their company or one of only a handful of people who do any programming. And also, like sometimes they're doing stuff like for Department of Defense or something kind of secretive where they're not allowed to talk to other people anyway, even if they wanted to. And so I feel like a lot of them they get stuck. They do the best they can with what they know, but they never see what's possible, and so they're stuck.
Yeah.
And it's hard for them to imagine doing things a different way because, well, I've been doing it this way for years and I still have a job, so why would I change? And I mean that makes sense in a way.
Reliving the same year of experience over and over again rather than gaining the experience as they go. Um,
Yeah, so I don't know what your all's thoughts are on things to combat that. I've been encouraging people to go to user groups. I've been encouraging them to contribute to open source projects. Do you have any other thoughts or ideas?
yeah, a lot of it is exposure to these things too. So it could be exposure to videos and books and things like that, or coding dojos and other things like that. I don't know, Austin, if you have others.
yeah. I really like what you said about meetups. I feel like that meetups and conferences, because I think I'm just stating something that the great Chris Lucian has stated to me before, is it becomes more real when you're interacting with other people who are really thinking differently and working differently, and you can ask the questions. You A lot of these meetups, and I can post some in our the show notes for this episode. but they have people there who can help you implement all the rough edges, you know what I mean, so to
Mhm.
speak, right? And I think often something like TDD, even with a language that's easy to TDD, not even something like LabVIEW, still has rough edges. And so you can go there and be skeptical, and they can help you out, figure it out, and in a safer space than. Like you were saying before, hey, I'm going to try out this new thing on the nuclear reactor. Everyone ready? So, um, yeah, I really like that idea a lot. And I guess one thing that might lead to a question for you is that I've seen work well is bringing in outsiders into the team to share new ideas or try them out with the team. And so when you work with these teams, who are doing LabVIEW and other things to introduce these ideas, what is your role technically? Are you like just like another team member and then just, oh, it's another team member that happens to have different ideas? Or do you come in more as like a outsider coach consultant type thing?
It's a little bit of both. It kind of depends on the situation. So right now, I find myself with one client, I guess you could say it, where I'm more of an employee, and that's not a great place to be. They're not necessarily paying me for my ideas. S- so often, what I like to do is come in as an outside coach or consultant, and then they're more receptive to my ideas.
Sure.
Uh, but it kind of requires the right mindset. The people who hire me as a coach or consultant, they already have the correct mindset. That's why they're hiring me. The people who hire me as an employee, they kind of generally don't because they're just like, oh, we're overwhelmed. We need another body. And I'm like, and I'm looking at their processes and their procedure. I'm like, you could use another body, but you could also fix all your processes and procedures and be way more productive with the people that you have.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's a hard sell. So people don't like change necessarily all the time. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess another follow-up question I had was so with regular code, there's like working effectively with legacy code, right? Where you come into a code base that's untested, everything's one giant, bowl of spaghetti. And
Mhm.
there's techniques and procedures you can do. So you don't have to, the only option is not rewrite the whole thing from scratch, but do it better. But where you can kind of, strangler fig, make good parts of the code that are well tested and well, refactored, and then that can grow the more and more you work on it. Is there such a way to do that with LabVIEW? Or is it kind of more of a rewrite kind of endeavor?
That is always a good debate. There are lots of people out there who like to do the big rewrites. I would say, in my experience, they tend not to go well. Sometimes they do. But I found a lot of luck with using approval tests and trying to wrap up as much as I can in approval tests. That's one way. The other thing too, sometimes people don't have a plan for testing stuff. And like, for example, if it's a circuit board tester, right? And there's no test for the tester. Well, if you've got 4 or 5 circuit boards and they've got, sometimes they'll put like, switches that you can inject certain failures or whatever. And so you run them all on the machine and you're running a separate machine with the new software and you move them over and you compare the test results. And like, that's at least a little of something to say, hey, at least it's kind of doing the same thing. We're getting the same results. Um, it is again one of those situations that where something went wrong and it's like, well, where is it? Which part went wrong? You're like, I don't know. But at least there's a problem, so that's a good step in the right direction.
Nice, nice. Okay, yeah. So there are things you can do, and I'm suspecting that you could use approvals. Like for me, one great use of approvals is like a rescue technique. Like instead of all this output goes to a flat file, and then we can approve that, and then as we clean up the code, we can make sure we didn't break that. Is it kind of a similar thing with LabVIEW? You just kind of redirect an output somehow, or yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely an easy way to
Mhm.
do it. A lot of times when you run the test, it will generate a test report, and so you can just archive that test report and use that, and
Okay.
that can work
Cool.
too.
Cool. Cool.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Nice. And so, kind of flipping out of legacy mode, um, is there a way to do, like, let's say you're making a LabVIEW project from scratch? So, is there such thing as like a greenfield TDD LabVIEW process, so to speak? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I do that all the time. Yeah, that's my standard mode. I mean, what I like to do typically is, the common hello world thing, right? So write a simple hello world, and then I'm a big fan of the CI/CD, so I get to the point where I can deploy the hello world, and then just kind of do the whole walking skeleton, tracer rounds, whatever you want to call it, of just kind of like building on top of that. Um, I would not say that's a common practice in the LabVIEW world. There are some people out there who work that way. Uh, there are plenty who are kind of still in that old waterfall style mode of thinking. So it just kind of depends.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and I guess for me, who's never seen a LabVIEW test, um, is it possible, like with other programming languages, to refactor names and things so it becomes more behavior-driven development, right? Where you're kind of capturing the high-level intent in the test. Is that kind of possible in the LabVIEW testing world?
Yeah, I mean, they have a bunch of the general XUnit style test
Okay.
framework. Write those. I don't think there's anything like Cucumber or anything like that,
Hmm.
or some of
Yeah.
the more like higher level things, but you could write something like that, I guess.
Nice, nice, yeah. Yeah, and that's something I've seen work pretty well, even if you're not using a tool like Cucumber, if you're using a traditional X style, XUnit style testing framework. You can even start bringing in the BDD style naming
Hmm.
and still get there just by renaming methods and tests and things. That's quite cool. Well, given that this is the mob mentality show, I almost have to ask this next question is, so you talk about agile concepts into the LabVIEW world and um, a traditional, at least technical practice in agile in many circles is pairing or sometimes mobbing. Have you ever done some LabVIEW pairing or mobbing?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
It's not very widespread. I try to at least pair as often as I can.
Mm.
It's not all that frequent. I have started, so I go to these LabVIEW conferences, and a while ago, Woody gave a presentation. You've probably seen it where he does some little video game that he plays.
Yeah, yeah. Baba is you, I assume is
Yes,
the
exactly.
yep.
Yeah, I totally. Sorry, Woody. I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed that, and I've done that at a
Yeah.
few hobby conferences, and they really liked it. It went over really well. And they have a group that does some open source projects, and they get together once a week and they do some mobbing. So then they get like 4 or 5 people who show up to that, and so that's pretty good. Uh, and I've started just like I have a couple open source projects, and I'll there's a LabVIEW Discord, and so on Fridays, or I'll just go in there and I'll be like, "Hey, I'm going to be in the code room if anybody wants to join me." And occasionally, a few people will join me, and we'll either pair or mob on what we're doing. So uh, most of my pairing and mobbing actually comes outside of the LabVIEW world. So I hang out the Saman coaching group,
Hmm.
Emily Bates and all them. They do some mobs, and Llewellyn has mobs for all the approval tests, and so I join those sometimes. And that's also like to your thing of stepping outside of your normal bubble. And like I've learned a lot from them. So that's been very useful. And if I had just stuck in the lobby world, I would have never experienced any of that. So
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think a lot of the what it looks like to mob on a visual programming language. I feel like it's getting more and more like that anyway with agentic, because with mobs and pairs that I've done with an agentic AI in the mix, a lot of the times it is very much like you're looking at a higher level, you're zoomed out more, and so the discussion becomes very different. And I think when you're looking at a graph together of operations and moving around connectors and things like that, um, it's becoming more and more common, I think, to have a collaborative discussion about how something should be wired differently rather than necessarily the code level operations that are going on. Yeah.
yeah, Levy is a long way from AI at the moment, actually. So AI is trained on GitHub, and so
Yeah.
like things like Python, it's very good at. LabVIEW, there's a little bit of inroads there, but not much.
Gotcha.
So maybe
Gotcha.
someday. Let's see.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so I guess that is one advantage of being the not the early adopter of a thing, because if it goes very poorly, you just dodged a bullet, right? So maybe there's an advantage to your world.
Yeah, or yeah, you just let everybody else figure out all the bugs and figure out what works, and then
Yeah.
Nice, nice. One thing you mentioned was CI/CD.
Mhm.
Um, and so a set of practices and tools and things come to mind when I think about that for like a web or a cloud or a software world. Um, what does that look like in a kind of LabVIEW world?
Yeah, so for most of my projects, my CI/CD pipeline, so I'm a big believer of like trunk-based development. So I've got one main branch, and whenever I make a push, it kicks off my CI/CD pipeline, and it would run unit tests, build my code, package it, distribute it. Um, I've heard people talk about trying to push it to like a machine or something that had some hardware connected so they could do some testing that way. I haven't gotten that far yet. So for me, it's usually it just does that, and then I have it set up to like when I make a release, it sends the customer an email and they can go download it. And sometimes I get fancy and have some kind of auto updating thing in there that lets them pull the latest version. But yeah,
Gotcha,
uh, the
gotcha.
big- the big challenge is with Python or something, you can spin up a Docker container. The way LabVIEW is, it's got these licensing requirements and stuff, and it's kind of difficult, and it's difficult to run it in a Docker container. So therefore, requires setting up your own runners, which is adds to the challenge. So
Gotcha, gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, at least having the I forget what Dave Farley calls it in continuous delivery, but it's basically the fast feedback loop in
yep,
a CI/CD pipeline. Having that, I don't know, at least in my book, is like 95% of the value anyways of a
yeah.
pipeline. And so it sounded like, but on the delivery side, it sounded like you said, an email that tells someone they can download it. Um, have you ever had it where it actually deploys like a new version of the LabVIEW, like onto the floor somewhere to some testing area or
No, I have not. Most of my customers are too conservative, I think, to try that. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I can say like in our environment, the we do have hardware in the pipelines on the way to the production delivery. And it's both a curse and a blessing. I think that sometimes hardware can be finicky or inconsistent. And so I mean it's good to evaluate for things that like recoverability and things like that, but it also ends up adding, duration to everything. A lot of the times that means a higher level of integration and things like that, and all of the good and bad that come along with those things.
yeah, I could
Yeah.
definitely see that slowing down your feedback loop. But to your point for the delivery stuff, like there are some open source projects that I work on. They're just like libraries that don't actually involve any hardware directly. And those, I mean, I've gotten it to the point where basically if it runs through my CI/CD thing, I just press a button and upload the new one to the package repository, and everybody's happy. And so, uh, yeah, I mean, I'm at the point where I don't even bother running it locally after that because it's gone through so many checks. I'm like, it's one of those things where like you can only check of what you thought of, and I've already checked everything I thought of. So yeah,
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like you're getting the spirit of it, which is confidence is super high and push button. And yeah, we've definitely been in environments like that before where um, if there's no way to do it covertly, like with a website, where they don't even know it's happening,
yeah,
where they have to do the download install process, sometimes their taste for release frequency is much lower than it's ready. But at least, from our perspective, we're confident whenever you're ready. It's yeah, push button, boom, and that's great. And I think that puts the development team at ease, and I guess everyone's at ease. I guess there just might be the side effect of bigger batches in effect. But if each small part of the bigger batch has been independently tested with high confidence, then I guess the big batch will be fine too. More than likely.
hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Another question I had for you was sometimes when I've been in environments and operated in a very like agile extreme programming kind of way, others who aren't are interested and want to learn about it, and it naturally spreads. Other times, they just have different values and principles and what they care about, and so it just doesn't really matter to them, and they don't really care. What's kind of been your experience like operating what I suspect in this very different kind of way in the LabVIEW world? And yeah, what's been the different reactions?
Yeah, well, one thing I've learned is show don't tell. It comes in very prominently. So like if you tell people how, or, if you ask like, "Hey, can we fix this? Can we fix that?" and you get some negative reaction, but if you just go fix it and then you're like, "Hey, look, I fixed this thing and it saved me an hour or something," that gets a much better reaction. So I think, to your point, I think part of it is trying to lead by example, and then people notice that like, hey, this guy is releasing a lot less bugs, a lot less rework. He's releasing faster, and that catches on. To your point, though, yeah, some people don't appreciate that, and I don't know. Part of me just says people are different, and
Yeah.
I can't change them. I could try to influence them, but
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, they optimize for different, priorities and values and principles. And for me, the ability to, develop peacefully and not break things because they're in small little pieces is like super thrilling and exciting, and I love it. And other people are like, I don't care. I want to see a big bang of 100 things, and if it's risky, that's fine. It's exciting. And so it's like,
well,
okay,
I think some people like playing the firefighter. So, if things are all calm and smooth, there's no need for a firefighter. So if you like being the hero who rushes in and saves the day,
Uh-huh.
that I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens. Like things are on fire and you got to put the fire out. But I'm much more into that fire prevention side of things. So yeah,
Yeah. And
Nice.
and I think in any of these environments, you'll end up with a mix of both, and that can be a challenge, um, and that may result in other organizational behaviors like down the line. And so, being aware of those things and talking about it, I think, is a really good thing. Uh, and that might be where retrospectives come into play. So I guess that brings to mind, are you doing things like retrospect, like agile ceremonies in any way, like retrospectives in this process, or is that not palatable to the group?
I'm a big fan. I try to do them as much as possible. I will say one of my current clients I'm thinking of, they do the daily Scrum meetings, but
Sure.
not in the best way. I guess you could say they're kind of. I'm sure you've heard those stories before.
Yeah,
So we do that, but retrospectives they definitely do not do, which I think is kind of a shame. And I really, when I first started that, I really wanted to encourage that because I was just like, hey, if we just had a retrospective like once a week, once a month, and then we came up with a list of things to change because they're very change resistant. But
sure.
I think part of what I've realized is in order for retrospectives to actually work, you have to have some psychological safety first so that people feel free to bring ideas up. And that I don't think is a palatable thing in some organizations. So,
Nice.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Well, we are getting somewhat close to time, so I think we'll shut it down here in a bit. But is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close, Sam?
uh, yeah, I'm part of a conference called GDevCon. So if you're a LabVIEW programmer, you're out there, we run this conference every year. And we're also running a LabVIEW Consultant Summit. So if you're a LabVIEW consultant, we're running that as well. That's coming up at the end of the month. And also, I do want to plug Empathy in Tech. I don't know if you guys know Andrea Goulet, but she had a group called Empathy in Tech. I'm a huge fan of them. Uh, they've done some very interesting stuff over the years. So cool.
Excellent, excellent. Wow. So this is thank you so much for joining us, Sam. It's really been quite fascinating for me personally to see some principles and practices that I love and hold dear and see how it applies into kind of the LabVIEW world. Um, and I think I knew enough about LabVIEW to be dangerous. Like some I've seen people use it. I've been next to the people in the reliability lab, making something open and close 1,000 times. And I've always wondered, like, oh, could that really transfer into that world? And thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your experiences there. And to our audience, yeah, please like and subscribe. Please, share this eye-opening experience with someone else if you feel it appropriate. Like someone else who maybe they're doing LabVIEW or firmware and hardware things, and things are in big batches and hard to troubleshoot, and you see the fires abounding and leaping around the building. Just yeah, maybe share this with them. It might spur on an idea to try out some of these things in the LabVIEW world. And we love to hear your experiences, audience. Yeah, have you tried these things in LabVIEW or similar type worlds? How did it go? What went well? What did not go well? And yeah, but please reach out to us on LinkedIn, X, and YouTube, and more with your comments. We love to hear it. And until next time, have a good one, everybody. See ya.
Everyone.
Bye.